All right, welcome back, guys. I have Joshua Archer with us today. Can you introduce yourself? You've had quite an interesting run, of all the things that you've done. So, can you
Right.
tell the audience who you are?
Sure. I think it's probably pretty common for us in the ADHD crowd to have many interests and many careers, and my pathway is no different from that. The most recent thing that I've done professionally was to create a nonprofit using role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games with kids for education and a whole person education as well. They're called the Game Academy. But before that, I ran a web company, web design company, and before that, I was a software engineer for years and years in dot coms. And before that, I think as a kid, I wanted to be a game creator, so I kind of came full circle back
Yeah.
to the games. But that's just the professional arm of things. I've have a million different hobbies as well.
Yeah. You did one of the very interesting things you do is you do the Dickens Fair every year, and you're doing that. Is that over now, or are you still in the
We
process of
have
that?
2 more weekends of that.
Two
So
more
it's
weekends.
early December now. It will be running till right before the Christmas break. So
Yeah, and I've never attended, but I assume it's like some other things that I do have context for where you're in full like role playing mode.
right. It's based on Charles Dickens' version of Victorian London, and it's been running for, I think this year is the 40th anniversary for the fair. And it runs in San Francisco at the Cow Palace, and a bunch of us get dressed up. Some of us play characters from actual books. Some of us create just individuals that would fit into that setting, and people will run different vignettes. Like there's, down the street from where we're at, I'm part of the Patty West School of Seamanship, which actually tracks an individual from history, Patty West, who would train unwitting people wanting to become sailors and really didn't give them very good training, and sent them off to be on the ships and took their money. But down the street we have Fagin and Oliver Twist, and throughout the fair is Scrooge, being accompanied by one of the three ghosts, and by the end of the day, he has his epiphany. So it's you're sort of just walk right into the world, and we're all doing our best to sort of bring life to that world in deep context.
Yeah, so fun. And I was checking in preparation for our meeting. I looked back at our notes, and Josh is actually a client of mine, and we've worked together for a couple years now. And I saw your ADHD story in those notes that I took, which was that one of your sons got diagnosed and then you realized you also had ADHD.
Right. I was an adult. I didn't get diagnosed until I guess 2022 or 2021 or one of the very recently. And it wasn't because I had any experience that made me think of that. But my son, who had been, he's looking at memes online, and he's like, this looks a lot like me, and he comes to me and say, Dad, I think I have ADHD. I was like, why? Why would you think that? And it's like, well, this of this and this. And he showed it to me like, yeah, that sounds pretty familiar. So we had him tested, and he uh, came back with a diagnosis. And then I also got tested because, as we know, it runs in the family, and I was pretty solidly, in that camp as well. But depending on what kind of struggle you have and what your particular circumstance, I just masked really well without knowing it, and became hyperfixated on grades. So that was my thing. And so society rewards you for that. But what they don't tell you is all of the anxiety and the sort of cortisol, fueled last minute papers, and, just all of the things that you're suffering in the background, trying to meet the requirements of the circumstance. And that when you have a job and you have a boss, they can set that level for you. But then when you become an entrepreneur and you start your own business, you are your own boss. And then you're hit with a new problem of, well, what do I do? What's more
Mhm.
important? And you try to do it all. And
Yeah.
you burn out. So that's where I've gone through. And now I've actually taken a step back from running the game academy. My partner is running it. I still teach classes, but I'm now just really trying to figure out how do I take on my interests in my life in a way that's sustainable.
And that's what has been a lot of our work together has been organizing your interests and managing your time. But so Josh is now writing for Substack, and it's one of his commitments that he's been keeping. And I want to read you an excerpt from one of the Substacks because I think those of you with ADHD are going to very much relate to this. And it says, so my pattern is to engage with people, interests, and hobbies and obligations as if they were the only thing I had to do until I found myself spinning 37 plates in the air on the end of sticks while juggling 48 bowling pins and riding a unicycle through the obstacle course of flaming hoops. And I
Mhm.
just thought I pulled that out because I thought it was just so perfectly ADHD. And there is that note of like not only the chaos, but also the hyperfixation on whatever is right in front of us at the moment.
Mhm.
And so that's been interesting to manage. But where I was suggesting that we had a podcast together, Josh reminded me right before the call because I couldn't remember exactly what I got so excited about. But it's this process that I work with a lot of clients on that Josh has adapted from not only other areas, but also in our work together of basically emptying your mind. And so, can you explain to people the process that you've pulled together for yourself?
Right. So, and when we say it's a process that I've pulled together, it's in the process of being a process. Like all things, it's
Everything
difficult,
is.
right? And I think that the uh, hyperfixation and impulsivity of like really interested in things and taking them on and pouring yourself into it is can be a superpower and can be really amazing when you can really just immerse yourself in that. But um, you often have a life and a context and all these other things. Maybe you have 12 other things just like that. And then you have your bills and you have your home life and you have your relationship with your wife, and you have a relationship with your kids, and you have your commitments that you've made to other people. And all of those things get stored in the backlot of your mind, and you don't get to choose when they show up. Sometimes they'll show up at the most inopportune moments, right? And that becomes this sort of anxiety chatter. And if that anxiety chatter is too loud, you can't focus. You can't focus even on the stuff you're really interested in because you're worried you're not doing the thing you should be doing. And how do you figure out what that is, anyways? Right. And
Yeah.
the the real key to focus is the ability to get rid of the distractions, especially for folks like us, because distractions, whether they be good or bad, are going to interrupt our flow. They're going to interrupt our flow, and then getting back into flow is incredibly difficult. Um, so, how do you quiet your mind? How do you get rid of the chatter? Well, the best thing that I've discovered is to create a place in my schedule where I can deal with planning my important things, where I can figure out my priorities, but not long term. Really, we're talking about incremental. We're talking about the next day, and
Mhm.
having those maybe you've got a half an hour, maybe you got an hour, depending on how much time you need in general. You set aside your planning time, and you know that it's there. And when you're doing whatever you're doing and the voices start chattering saying, "Hey, that thing you got to do, did you do it, did you do it, did you do it?" You're like, "Hey, I had my planning period, and in that planning period I made choices, and those are the choices I'm going to stick with. And this thing that I'm worried about is not unreal, it's not incorrect, but I'm going to just park it. I'm going to park it till the next planning period, because if it's not that I made the right choices last time, I'm definitely going to make the right choices next time, or at least I'm going to make the ones that I'm informed about in that moment." So
Yeah.
if you can divert those noisy interruptions in your head, then you can clear the deck for actually going deep in what you're doing. And it's about trusting yourself, and it's about really giving yourself a break from the worries, that
Yeah.
you're not getting rid of the worries. You're not gaslighting yourself. You're not saying you don't have to be worried about it. You're just saying that's not now time. Right now, I'm chopping wood.
Mhm.
I'm carrying water. That's what I'm doing. And I'll worry about worrying when it's time to worry. And
Yeah.
but the other side is you have to keep that date. You can't let that slide. You can't get to the planning period and say, "Oh, I'm so jazzed about what I'm doing right now. I'm going to just stay in that and I'm not going to plan," because you made yourself that commitment. And that's what allows you to have your focus time, is that you're going to give yourself the plan time.
Yeah, and once you really get this down, it's funny that like I don't have to worry about that right now because I have a tool that I've developed from working with clients called the Now Not Now list. And the way I offload this kind of information is all of this goes, everything that doesn't matter in the next day or two goes on the Not Now list. But I'm really happy that you mentioned trust because it is building trust with yourself and it calms your brain just to go, I can trust that that's on that list and I can look at that list later. And I even like to hide my not now list from myself because I already got it out and now I don't need to worry about it. It doesn't matter today or tomorrow. And also, one thing that we talk about is deciding what's enough in your life. How how's that been for you as far as like kind of paring down and because you're a man of many interests, right? So talk about that.
Yeah, that's been tough. Because, when your mind is always popping, and especially if you're trying to build a business, you have the superpower of being able to see across categories and you can see all the things that need to be done. But you pay the price in the ability to figure out what needs to be done first, what can be done realistically alongside other things. And so it's just, there's a lot of unknown. Your anxiety is built, my anxiety, my own anxiety comes from not being able to figure out what I should be doing right now. Right. And
Mm,
so if I stack my deck with too many things, um, then I'm always in a state of fight or flight. I'm always in a state of like jumping from one thing to the next because it's the only way I could even conceive of getting it done. And honestly, I can't do it all. I'm tricking myself. I'm fooling myself. The thing I've been trying to do is just roll it all back and just say, all right, what's the one thing I can do? Instead of trying to make the question about how do I get all this stuff done, you
yeah.
flip it. You don't try to worry about fixing all of the world's problems. You just figure out what's the next thing I'm going to work on. Because the truth is, you'll never do it all. You'll never do it all. And you have to accept that. But it's also a blessing because when you flip it on its head, you do get to choose what you are going to do. And somebody, I can't remember who it was talking about, it was a friend or something I read about like perspective on like things like charity or work with towards good. If you measure yourself against all the tasks that don't get done, all the people that you don't help, all the lives that you don't save, you're never ever going to be happy. But if you look at, hey, I changed one person's life today, or I fed one person,
Mm,
or I clothed one person, like that's positive. And you got to take your life that way. You've got to take your life in terms of what you can accomplish and not in terms of what you're not accomplishing. And that's
yeah.
the struggle.
And every one of my clients that I work with are highly intelligent people. And the problem with that is the not intelligent people don't notice all the things that aren't happening. They're not worried about it. But we are. And there was another thing that you wrote about in your Substack about popcorn. And
Mm,
like I think you called it idea popcorn or something like that, but you described this experience in your childhood. Tell us about that.
right. So when I was in kindergarten, I had a kindergarten teacher who was really creative. And one of the things that she would do as a reward for, I don't know, good behavior for the class is that she would put a big blanket out in the classroom. It might be like 8 foot by 8 foot. And in the center of the blanket, she would put an electric walk, and then have all the kids sit around the outside of the blanket with, you can't get onto the blanket, but she would put oil and popcorn into that wok, and it would sit and it would heat up, and you would listen and the sound would change, and you would hear like sizzling and popping and all of these sort of really loud sounds, and all of a sudden pop, pop, you'd get these pieces of popcorn that would start flying out in different directions, and if it flew towards you and you could reach it without getting on the blanket, you got to take it. And it was one of those things that I both really loved and I also really hated, because you never get to choose where that popcorn goes, and you might sit there on that blanket and never get a single kernel, and it just goes elsewhere, right? So sometimes when I'm in my life, the ideas that I'm getting are like this, like they're popping and they're going and they're landing different places, but I can't reach all of them. And sometimes it's almost like you combine that picture with having a little Jack Russell Terrier in the room who goes around and eats all the popcorn. And so, like, you're just watching all these ideas go away. They just pop up and they go away. And that's can be incredibly frustrating. And that's that sort of idea, popcorn idea of like, how do you capture those kernels, you know, or how do you just let it be background noise, because maybe you don't need all that. Maybe you don't need all that popcorn, right?
Yeah, I will tell you, like, that's kind of back to the tool of the now, not now list. That's where all my idea popcorn goes, is on the not now list. And some of those things have been there for a year. And so when I thought that they were so important that I had to capture them, I now realize, well, maybe it just wasn't that important anyway. But then I look at the list and I'm like, do I want to take these things off? Well, no, I still would someday like to do these things. I was just experiencing this with my coaching business, actually. I guess with the economy, I don't know, but my consultations had gone like really, really down. And now they have just sped up. So, so much from like one a month to what normally used to be two a week. And then it got to one a month for about 4 months. And now my consultations are like three or four a week. And I am always thinking, like, my idea popcorn in this example is always, what else should I be doing? In order, should I be advertising? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And there's always a million things we should do. I just interviewed an author. I believe the podcast will come out this Thursday, but I believe her book is called From Chaos to Order. And her name is Jacqueline, first name Jacqueline. I'm not recalling her last name at the moment, but there's several books under that name. But I think it was her book that talked about our brains are just not meant for the modern world. We're not meant to to carry a computer in our pockets. And I'm hearing, I love this. I think I've talked about it on here several times, but there's this podcast I love called My First Million. And it's these two guys that are come from the tech industry and have done all kinds of different businesses. And I love their show because a lot of times they don't agree with each other. But one thing that they're talking about on the show as technology that's coming is like, that's already here actually, but is having basically computer screens on your eyeballs, which would be these glasses that the name of them has left me at the moment. But I can see once that technology starts to take off, then it's going to be contact lenses, and then we're never going to be able to get away from technology. And so I can see that there would be this backlash in the future of just shutting down all kinds of technology. Like on my phone, I have shut down all notifications whatsoever. But I see your ideas percolating there. What's going on?
Well, I totally, uh, I agree with the sentiment, and I'm of an age where, I mean, I was Gen Xer. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s,
Me too.
and I was an incredibly curious kid, and I followed all of my rabbit holes. But what that meant was, is I went to the library once a week, you
Exactly.
know, and it wasn't. I wasn't able to be distracted to the level that I am now. Now, if I have a question or a wonder of, who invented that, or how do you pronounce that word, or what does that phrase mean, all I got to do is whip my phone out. And I
Wow.
do that a lot of the time. And that adds up. The distractions, the pull towards the interest, the thing and I shudder to think that if I don't even have to pull the phone out of my pocket, if all I've got to do is think and gesture, like we're not really human anymore. Like we'll be something
Yeah.
else. I don't know what it's going to look like. Maybe it'll be okay, but we'll definitely be dependent at that point at a level that we're not right now. And we know peace? Will we know how to calm ourselves? Will we be able to have silence? That is what I think is most at threat. And who knows what negative effects that will have on our health, our well-being, our ability to communicate. Humans
Yeah.
are meant to have solitary time. We don't have a chatterbox on the top of our head that says everything we're thinking, and that's a really good thing. If we have
Yeah.
more and more interfacing with machinery that makes it easier for us to not shut up and not to stop, I worry. I do worry.
Yeah. I very much relate to the library because that is like where I got all of my information. And I remember being, probably about 5 years old too. It's kind of my 5-year-old story, but my grandparents had this like encyclopedia of like animals. And so there was a book on horses and a book on cats. And I would sit there cross-legged just going through all that information or like highlights magazine or just reading prolifically. And I was discussing with my husband yesterday because my kids are educated a little. First, I homeschooled for like 12 years, and now they're in a education program that's called the Socratic Experience, which some colleges have adopted, which is just a very different learning style. So they're not being educated the way I was being educated. And the discussion I was having with my husband was, is that even going to matter? Do they even need to, do we need to know multiplication? Do, the last podcast I mentioned, my son, when he did go to school, he chose to go to middle school. Came home and he's like, Mom, they can't read analog clocks. They don't know how to tell time. And so, like, do these things matter anymore? And does it matter how kids get an education, or will they constantly have a second brain
Mm.
somehow, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, I have a master's degree in education. It's one of the things that I did in order to be better at my work that I did with the Game Academy. And there's this thing that's called hidden curriculum. It's the stuff that you don't teach, and it's
Mm.
just as important as the stuff that you do teach. And if you are learning that you don't need to know anything, but you just need to know how to use the tools, you become a conduit. Like this is happening in software engineering right now with AI, right? Where we're
Mm.
looking at a future where it is very possible that we won't have as many coders, as many people that are working directly with the machines. And instead, we're going to have much more people who are just good at asking the questions of the machine to get the machine to program itself, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in one sense, yeah, I mean, you're just pushing the envelope. Maybe you just develop new skills. But on the other hand, the way we have creativity is that we call upon the disparate things in our mind that we know how to do, and we see how those things can be combined together to make something new. And if we don't know
Hmm.
these fundamentals, they don't get to be a part of that conversation, and they're
Yeah.
just a black box. And so I do think it matters to at least to some degree. Maybe it doesn't matter to always do long division, but you should learn how at least once.
You should at least have the skill, right? That's interesting because my 15-year-old is very interested in being a coder, and both the 15-year-old and the 17-year-old are very against this world of AI that's coming. One is an artist and one wants to be a coder. And what I've told them that, it's just my opinion. We'll see what they do with it. But they were, very anti-AI. I said, you're going to get left behind. You you really need to embrace this to some degree, but who knows if that's true. Like part of our conversation has reminded me we're both Gen X, and what were our parents worried about? Watching too much TV. TV is terrible. Don't watch so much TV. And I lived in a town where before we got a satellite dish, which sounds ancient, we had like three channels in our town. One was PBS, one was like ABC, maybe the other was NBC, I don't know. And there really wasn't a lot of TV to watch. Where my husband, as soon as there were satellite dishes available, his parents had that and they had all kinds of channels. But that was also in the book or the podcast that I was listening to that same day, which was like there's always this fear of the next technology. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I'm not afraid of technology, and I don't think that anything in itself is dangerous. But it is very much how we adopt and guide the use of those things and what gets lost in the process.
Hmm.
Calculators haven't stopped people from being able to do arithmetic,
Right.
but maybe it has caused people to be slower at it or not be able to do it in their head. Does it matter? Well, in some contexts, it really doesn't matter. But, say you get lost in the wilderness and you have to calculate, an orienteering path back to civilization. You've got a map, you've got a compass. But how do you figure out how to get there? How do you figure out, like you might need these skills, or you've got your cell phone and it's got a GPS on it, but it runs out of battery. Do you know how to use a compass? Do you have one even? Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we as humans evolved with technology. It is a part of who we are. I think that we just have to be careful. Like I would say to your children, like you should be part of the conversation so that you can guide where it goes. That's the
Mm,
biggest deal is like if you sit and try to opt out of something that is not going away, you lose your ability to determine where it goes. And so
yeah.
you've got to learn how it's being done and maybe, you know, put your foot in the ring and say like this is a useful way to do it and this is not so good. Like algorithms are really good at helping us for stuff that we don't need to be spending our time on, but should it be creating you know art, painting, things like that? Well, if it does, then you're losing the entire realm of how artists get trained, right?
Hmm.
It's if you give over a task to a technology, it's going to be very hard to take it back. So it
Yeah.
just stay in the conversation, really. Don't fear it, but don't don't ignore it.
Yeah, I love that. And also with these new, each generation, has its new thing. There was some biography that I was reading. It was talking about how they were fearing electricity at one point, and then they feared cars, and then like
Mhm.
I mentioned, our generation fearing TVs, and I for a long time I really and was concerned and still am a bit how much time my kids spend on the computer. It's an obscene amount of time, and some of that I can place blame on myself for not requiring that they're doing other things, but we've had discussions about, okay, let's make sure we're getting our exercise. Let's make sure we're, keeping good posture while on the computer, that kind of thing. But I had an experience yesterday where I was traveling back from Tucson, Arizona, and we stopped at a convenience store to get something to drink. And the kid behind the counter, he was doing such a good job, like getting people and it was very busy. And he was, getting people checked out. He was all by himself behind the counter. But when it came to our interaction, he was extremely rude. And my husband immediately got upset. And I held back for a second. I did say, there's no need to be rude. But then I kind of held myself back and I pondered on it as I was getting back on the freeway. And I thought, oh my gosh, this kid has probably been behind a computer screen his whole life. This is his experience interacting with the real world where he's not a keyboard warrior saying anything he wants to say. And that is where, like, okay, are we losing human interaction a little bit? And that's why I didn't get angry with the kid because I'm like, it's just not his fault. This is just a byproduct of
Right.
this new thing that's coming. And so,
And there's the way that they spend their lives, and then there's are they given any opportunities in their lives to practice these skills or even be told that these skills are important, right?
Yeah.
Um, the technology that we use distances us from one another physically, and it can cause an alienation. But it's, it's akin to like driving in your car and getting road rage. Like if you don't see the other cars on the road as having drivers who are people, and those people having lives and issues and problems, and oh, this guy just cut me off. Well, maybe he was distracted by something that happened in the car.
Yeah.
Maybe he was just thinking of that thing that popcorned into his head and he didn't notice your turn signal. Like, how many times have I done that? And I've
Yeah.
felt really bad about it. But you can't, knock on the window of the car next to you and say, I'm really sorry. So we have to just allow for that being part of the experience, right? And it makes
Yeah.
us feel better. Like, I had an experience where somebody cut me off on the freeway, and my first, impulse was like, because it was obvious. It wasn't like the person was, oh, I accidentally came over there. They sped up and got in front of me and slowed down, like I had somehow become their, problem. And
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'm going to back up from this. And now what I'm going to do is everybody who wants in front of me, I'm just going to let them. I'm going to give
Mhm.
them the space and give them that opportunity. And I instantly felt better. Like it
Yeah.
just changed the perspective. So we do need to interact with one another to learn these skills. But we also have to remember, uh, we don't know all the story, especially if we have a limited exposure to people, right? So
Mhm.
I think when it comes to the use of technology and that distancing part, like we have to mitigate it. We have to culturally decide where it's appropriate and where it's not appropriate, if we want to preserve the things we value today.
Yeah.
If we don't want to preserve those things, if we don't care about those things, well then, you know, we'll find out where we end up. But I don't like to sit in the back seat. I want to be part of the conversation. So
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to try to promote what I think is right, and but doing it in a way with compassion and not blame, because nobody likes to be yelled at. Nobody likes to be told they're doing it wrong. You know.
Yeah. That's so interesting you said that because, my husband, his immediate reaction, even though he's a very chill guy, but the kid was very rude.
Mm.
And his immediate reaction was to get really upset. But, me thinking about it afterwards, I'm like, I'm sure it didn't make that kid feel good for me to tell him he was being rude. Did he need to know? Yes. But I'm sure it didn't make him feel good because he did not apologize. He just kind of tried to sweep it under the rug and move on to the next customer. And so, yeah, those interactions are going to happen, maybe less and less with, self-checkout and things like that.
Right. We
But
may just have AIs that are programmed to treat us very nicely, and
yeah,
never even notice it anymore.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But to kind of take this full circle, a lot of the work that I do with, especially my male clients, I don't think we've really dealt a lot with this actually, but I've had several clients that the phone has been the problem. The phone has been the distraction. The phone has been the disconnect from the family. And that's been something that we had to work on. And so what's your experience with that?
I dealt with that before we started working together.
Really?
Um, it is because, as I was saying before, like every impulse or whim of what I want to know is right there. Plus, I might be engaged in multiple conversations on social media, and I've got that like, you know, have they answered yet? Are they here yet? Are they answered yet? But really, more than anything, it's about a tolerance for unfocused interaction. It's a tolerance for boredom. Like since we have the ability to give ourselves dopamine in any moment of the day, any second, like those uncomfortable pauses or those silences or those things where you're trying to get your head together and figure out what you're going to say to somebody, you know, uh, they disappear, and therefore we don't learn how to navigate them, and
Yeah.
it was the case where I would find myself on my phone instead of sitting down at the dinner table and talking, you know, and it's never. I mean, it's not always even stuff that's interesting or useful. It might just be phone games, you know. And
Mm.
so I had to make myself a rule that like I get one phone game on my phone at any given time.
I do the exact same thing.
Yeah, because just one, that's a challenge enough, you know. But if I have,
Yeah.
you know, Words with Friends and Blockadoku and all these other things, you know, they have a social aspect to them. There's a competitive aspect to them, and I could spend all my time wasting my time on that. And I'll even try to leave my phone at home at times, like if I know that I don't need it, if I don't need to be connected, you know. And then I go to Burning Man, and up until recently, like you didn't have internet out there, so it was an enforced seclusion from all of this, right? So
Mm.
I do think it's important for us to disconnect, to, you know, put the phones in the box, you know, and close the box when you're having family interactions. Just like it's it's a great tool that can be so easily overused, and it
Yeah.
takes so much time incrementally away from the things that really matter more.
Yeah. And that's one thing too that Josh is really good at is your human interactions. You have your camping trips and Burning Man and the Dickens Fair, and you've put a really an importance on your human interactions. And is that part of the work that you did with getting away from the phone, or has that always been? Has that just come naturally to you?
I think that growing up, I was, since I was undiagnosed ADHD, there was an awkwardness that I possessed. Maybe an overenthusiasm, or maybe, you know, I always knew the answer to things and I was always, you know, impulsively raising my hands or answering questions or interjecting, or so I had to learn how to interact in a way that other people found comfortable.
Mm,
Maybe that could be considered masking. Maybe that's just learning skills. But one of the things that I discovered early on in my life was role playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, things like that, where I was able to practice interactions in a social arena. But it wasn't about me, it was about my character. And it wasn't about the other players, it was about their characters. So you could make social faux pas, you could do the wrong thing, and it didn't reflect badly on you.
yeah,
And
interesting.
it's one of the things that, you know, I've carried into the work that I do with the kids when in the game academy is that same sort of giving a performance space to learn how to be a person, um, and to make it not be so high stakes.
Yeah. To be able to be messy. And I love that you said awkward. That's how I've always described myself is
Mhm.
awkward. And I actually got some coaching on it and they said, "Well, what makes it awkward?" And I realized that it was my thinking that I was going to be awkward in this interaction that actually made me more awkward and still does to this day. Especially with people that I don't know well. Uh, I can get so worried and so in my head about being awkward that I will come off very awkward.
Right. Tripping over yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Exactly.
hasn't
That's
gone away for
interesting.
me. You know, you give yourself a little moment to slow down before you have, like, if you know it's a high stress situation and you're worried about it, you know, you take a moment, you focus in, you say, okay, this is going to be as easy as it's going to be. You know, I can't make it any better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. I love that. All right. Well, I think we've had a great conversation. We've hit on a lot of things. What do you think ADHD professionals and entrepreneurs need to know?
Well, I mean, many people who are professionals are also people who have the same, you know, divergence in their neurology. So we have a sense of what the experience is like. But if you don't, I mean, I think the biggest thing, especially for, you know, adults that have late life diagnosis, is that there's always that feeling of like, am I doing this right? Am I fitting the
Mm,
mold? Am I, Why does it feel so hard? Why does it feel so awkward? And that self-talk can really turn into hindrances. And really, it's the therapeutics around the situation and allowing people to really fully accept who they are and what they're really good at and what the challenges are. And that just because you have those challenges doesn't mean that you'll never do those things, that it's not, you know,
Yeah.
uh, a victim mentality. It's not like, well, I can't plan, so I'm not gonna plan. It's like, no, it's just a challenge, just like anything
Yeah.
else in your life. Some people are really good runners, other people have to practice at it. Some people,
Mhm.
can do math well, other people have to practice at it. Some of us have poor short-term memory and we have to either practice at it or have tools that help us, like have your notebook. It's the only way you can survive. So, letting your clients know, look, there's so many tools to help you meet the difficulties. Don't beat yourself up about that. And really also just celebrate what you can do better than other people and use
Yeah.
that forward.
Yeah, and just building on what you were saying there, a thought I like to offer clients a lot when they're, learning to manage their time or they're, trying to learn some skill or build up one of their executive function skills is I'm becoming a person who, fill in the blank. I'm learning the skill of fill in the blank instead of I can't do this. Because as soon as we're saying I can't, what happens? That's
You
exactly what becomes true. It's like when we're driving, you're going to go where you're looking. My husband's a farmer and he will check fields, sometimes not even his own. As we're driving around, I live in an agriculture town. He will, look onto the fields and see like if there's weeds or bugs or, bug damage or what's going on with that field. And sure enough, the truck goes towards the field.
I
And that's the same with our thoughts. Like it's when we're learning these skills, we need to make sure that we're thinking in such a way that we're going in the direction that we want to go. And so, but yeah, that being said, I definitely want to direct people to your Substack. Is there anywhere else you would like people to connect with you?
well, I mean, the Game Academy is still an organization that I put a lot of energy into, and
Very good.
they do really good work. We do really good work. So the gameacademy.org is a place to find out about the work we do. And if you have kids in your life, that are looking for ways to sort of fully express themselves and learn how to be people.
Mhm.
We do both in-person work and remote work, online games, etc. So anywhere around the country or the world, as long as we can fit a time zone, we can help. And the Substack is going to be Monday publishes, so come and check it out. As my writing chops grow, there may be more, but it's really all of those things through my life that I've always like, I should write about this or I should write about that. I just finally said, okay, this is my commitment. I'm going to do at least one essay a week. So come and
Yeah.
see my journey.
Yeah, and I'm all caught up, and it is very much ADHD friendly. You're definitely like seeing a brain just like your own as you're reading Josh's work. So it's going well, and I'm proud of you for not that you need me to be proud of you, but for making the commitment and following through. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, well, thanks so much for being on today. Appreciate it. All right, we'll see you guys next week.